All right, I think we are all set. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you for joining this session on how to take control of your data using server-side GTM. My name is Amanda. I am a member of our marketing team, and I'm joining to have the pleasure of sharing our presenters with you today. We have Adam Furr from Google. He's a global product lead. I've had the pleasure of working with Adam in the past for InfoTrust and Google events, so I'm very excited to have him join us here today. And then we also have one of our very own InfoTrusters, Jordi Rora, who's a senior analytics engineer. So both Adam and Jordi work with server-side GTM on a daily basis, so I know that you are in very good hands, and this is going to be an awesome presentation. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Adam and Jordi.
All right. Well, thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. As Amanda said, I'm Adam Fair. I'm the global product lead on server-side GTM. Excited to talk to you today about what server-side GTM is, why as Google we're very excited about it as a product, and from Jordi's side, how InfoTrust thinks about server-side GTM and what it can do for you and your business. In terms of agenda, we're going to do a quick refresher on tag management systems just to level set. From there, we'll go into some pain points with client-side tagging, which is the more traditional way of tagging today. From there, I'll give you a quick overview on what server-side GTM is, and then we'll pass it to Jordi to go into more depth about how server-side GTM solves all those client-side pain points that we talked about earlier that we'll talk about. And hopefully that will get you excited about server-side GTM, and so we'll talk about how to get started if you are interested. Okay, so with that, I will pass it to Jordi to give you a quick refresher on tag management systems.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. So it's kind of difficult nowadays to imagine a time when, or a marketing scenario where tag managers were not present. But traditionally, this was something that was given over to developers to implement code on the websites, which was a very cumbersome and finicky process. But the tag managers now they have taken out a lot of that pain by essentially being the middleman between our data and the different data consumers or different parties that turn that data into essentially value. So Tag Manager will typically take any data that is available on the browser, which is typically a lot, and help you manage which of that data reaches which destinations and at what time and in what manner. This, although I did mention that comes with as a great convenience as opposed to having to ask developers to copy and paste or implement different code that sometimes comes with a little bit of logic, which can be difficult to convey, such as, for example, implementing a pixel only if certain conditions have been met, or can basically create a lot of havoc with a website in terms of how much dead code is left, understanding which pixels are firing when. There's very little visibility on what that happens. So there is that convenience, but it doesn't come without its own challenges. And those challenges typically come with in the form of either control and governance being able to understand which data is being consumed by who and when, and whether they are really consuming that data. If is data not being is a party necessarily taking the data that they need or extending what they are taking, being able to own that data. We're shipping a lot of data to third parties. We rely a lot on third parties to handle and turn that data into value. It's not often easy to take full ownership of that data and building that relationship of trust with our customers. And then there's obviously the challenge of being able to react to all the changes that are happening in the scope of advertising, with the third-party cookies being very much top of mind for a lot of our colleagues. So to go into a bit further, deep dive into those challenges, one of them is, of course, being able to govern. It's very easy to take one website, build a data layer, set up a container, and then ship that data off to different places. But when you're in a large organization with multiple assets, multiple websites, multiple apps, being able to, which typically each one will have their own container, which will have global tags or global configurations, local configurations. There's going to be a bit of a tug of war between the local market and the global, between terminologies, data models, and how that data is being put to good use. But basically, making small changes to a single tag can require you to go to multiple different destinations, multiple different containers to be able to make that one small change. And that, of course, is becomes a challenge in terms of being able to roll out that thing, being able to agree on standardization. I was once in a very heated argument with the market, where the global company was saying that a certain category should be named in one way, but the local market wanted it named a different way. There was this conflict between the terminology. Different markets may want small tweaks in how different tags function. For example, address. An address in Europe is not the same as an address in America. There's going to be differences in the level of information that can be passed on. So there is a number of challenges that come associated with growing and going at a scale. Obviously, the other problem is that you're sending data to many different third parties who are providing a lot of value because they focus on that one thing, right? They focus on creating audiences, they focus on personalization, they focus on giving you an overview of the user behavior on your site. But essentially, that data resides within that tool. So even though it's your data, it becomes very difficult to be able to access it, compare it, and run it across, and basically be able to get the full potential you could out of that data, simply because there is that additional chore of having to extract, clean up, consolidate, coalesce, and essentially put that data to good use, even though, again, it's your data. There's also the obvious factor of site speed and performance. There's going to be a lot of JavaScript tags or bits of JavaScript running on your page. That takes time. That makes the page go a little bit slower. It's going to generate lots of different network requests, especially on phones or mobile devices, can make the experience feel sluggish and underperforming. And that, of course, means you're losing on data. The data can be interrupted, can be fragmented. And of course, the user is not going to be happy with having to wait to get the full experience out of the site, because there's all these other things going on in the background, and that it's not just a matter of limiting one or two tags, because those tags can in turn fire additional tags and create additional network requests, and it all kind of adds up and adds to that bloat and that feel of sluggishness that sometimes we get when we're navigating or moving through content and trying to obtain a service. This is a very clear example of just how very quickly things can get out of hand. There's lots of different products communicating and relaying information to lots of different other products. So not only do you have the performance, it's that not being able to control who is getting what data. And since data that is usually made available via JavaScript on the page, it basically means it's available for everybody to inspect, to scour, and to take away. So it's very difficult to be able to limit who gets what in terms of the governance of data. It's a very dirty subject in some cases. And finally, there's the obvious reliance on third-party cookies, which are, as we know, going away. We come from a world where in our industry we've basically had a free buffet of data. Sure, probably not very high quality data, but we had lots of it. And the problem with this is it was very easy to abuse. So all these changes are happening for a very good reason. And it's very good that they're happening, but it does mean that we have to shift away from the concept of the free buffet of data and work towards a trust-related model. And that said, I will pass it over to Adam.
All right. You had me at free buffet. Just kidding. Okay, so now that Jordi has set the context on client-side challenges, this is a relevant time to give you an overview of what server-side GTM is and how it works. So server-side GTM brings a lot of the same tag management concepts, but it brings them to the cloud. And it essentially allows you to route data from your website to your own server before it goes anywhere else. So walking through this diagram, instead of having a bunch of tags collecting data for individual partners like Google Ads, Google Analytics, Facebook, and so on, you have a single tag that's collecting data. And that data, instead of going directly to a partner like Google, it goes to your own server. And that server could be Google in Google Cloud, it could be in AWS, it could be your own infrastructure, it doesn't matter. And SGTM lives there and receives that data and sort of cleans it up and makes it available for server-side tags. And those tags send data to Google Analytics, to Google Ads, a bunch of different third parties. And so that key difference is that the data is flowing through your own server environment, which gives you an additional layer of transparency and control. Before the data goes anywhere else, it comes to you, you see what's coming through, and you can control where it goes next. So Jordi will go into a lot more detail on why that can be beneficial in more specific ways, but hopefully that gives you a general sense of how this works. The other benefit of server-side GTM and tag management systems in general is that this is not just for Google. We obviously support all Google tags natively, but there's a community gallery where third parties like Facebook, TikTok, and Snapchat have added tags as well. And so that gallery continues to grow. And so when you're doing this data collection with all this transparency and control, you're doing it across all of your platforms, not just Google in isolation. And finally, wanted to touch on a few things in the roadmap. So a few recent feature launches, we've launched enhanced conversion support for Google Ads. So this is the PII-based conversion data collection that supports and makes your measurement more durable in the long term. On that front, we also have full consent modeling support, which is less relevant in the US, but in Europe, where consent banners are often in place, this type of modeling becomes very important. And finally, we have this Firestore integration, which Jordi will touch on in a little bit more detail, but this essentially allows for real-time data enrichment, which is one of the benefits of having this data flow through your own cloud environment. Looking to next year, we have a couple exciting features. One is this in-UI data modification, a set of data modification tools. So with that data flowing through your own environment, you have a lot of control, but this is going to make that much easier to implement. It won't require any coding. You'll be able to do things natively within the GTM environment. We're also launching Google Signals support for GA4. And Google Signals is really important for a lot of downstream use cases like GA4 audience activation, some of the demographic reporting and cross-device modeling and a few other things. So it's really important for making GA4 as powerful as it can be. And finally, if you have heavy app traffic, we're bringing the same concepts of server-side GTM on web to app by integrating directly with the Firebase SDK. So that will come a bit later next year, but will allow you to do the same types of data modifications and fanning out across web and app. If there are any more questions about the roadmap, toss them in the Q&A and we can hit them at the end. But for now, I'll pass it back to Jordy to talk about how server-side GTM can solve some of those client-side pain points.
Thank you very much, Adam. Now, the first thing I would like to point out is that server-side GTM is not a replacement for Google Tag Manager, although they share the name and they share the interface. They do quite. I mean, there is a bit of overlap between what they do, but they serve completely different purposes, and basically this is the continuation of this transformation that Google is doing, moving away from a handheld data experience into basically putting you at the wheel of your own data strategy. With GA4, you define your own data model. With server-side GTM, you are able to intercept that data journey as it's going through, so that you can control how that data looks, where it goes to. So rather than being a solution that solves a problem, it's more of a springboard onto which you can open a world, or basically it's a red carpet into the cloud and all the potential that has for your data. So one of the main advantages of this is basically data governance. You're sending your stream of data, you're sending up your package of data, your data layer, you're sending your data payload to a single endpoint, and from there you're basically streaming that data in real time to the different data consumers, or to the different parties who are going to turn that data into value. This can be your analytics solution. It can be GA4, of course. It can be any third party or any other advertisers. It can be your own BigQuery, your own data sets. Basically, you are controlling who gets what data. And because this is happening in an isolated environment within the cloud, that means that a single tag cannot then spring up different other, or at least not on the page. I mean, they can in turn relay it to different parties, but what those other different parties can't do is scour your data layer or scour your data payload in order to take information that they are not supposed to. So basically, you are controlling who gets what data and guaranteeing that that data is not being misused, or anybody's taking more than what they were supposed to be taking. Another very exciting prospect, and this is probably one of the biggest changes for me personally, is the fact that you can you now really properly own your data. Your data is going directly into your domain. You are building that relationship of trust with your consumers because they are seeing that data is going to a place that you control, that there's not 1,000 different tags doing whatever it is that they're doing on the page, making the page feel bloated. And that data is basically going to a place where they have placed a relationship of trust. In there, you can then enrich it in real time, as Adam was mentioning before. Firestore is fantastic, a fantastic little tool for this, meaning you can then either make your payloads a little lighter, make the site feel a little bit more sprightly, and enrich, add to that data before you send it off to Google Analytics, to Facebook, to Google Ads, to the places where that data is going to go. Meaning you can have much leaner data packages leaving your website, but still have all the information and all the value for this. And not only that, with the way the server-side GTM is laid out, you not only control which data goes where, but you can also provide a custom response back to the browser. So that data enrichment goes in two directions. It can either go towards GA, or it can go back to the browser and enrich the experience of the user in real time with feedback you might get from personalization services, segmentation, etc. So it's really opening up a number of possibilities that go in both directions, and basically it's giving you more power and the ability to do more things than with just a regular tag management. Everything from a controlled, safe, secure, and stable environment. You also get that data in real time. Before, you would typically, the journey was you gather the data in your website, send it, GTM sends it over to GA4, then that goes and gets processed, ends up in BigQuery. No, now you can create your own bespoke custom data sets in BigQuery. You can filter out events, you can filter and transform data values. You can basically build data sets in real time that serve very, very, very specific purposes. So for example, if you're building a personalization service, you only need to send the events that carry meaningful signals to that data set, so that your data scientists don't need to spend time cleaning up, verifying, and just focusing on what it is that they do best. So again, this is really a red carpet into the cloud, so you can take advantage of that data with all the services that are available in the cloud in real time. And it makes it very, very easy to essentially customize and, as I said, take the reins and have full control over your data strategy at a point before it gets sent or processed anywhere. I jumped ahead. The being able to use Cloud Firestore in order to enrich data, that is a great addition. I mean, not that you couldn't before, because you could always have a little service that basically intercepted and enriched the data. But with Firestore, it makes everything just so much easier, because in the end, what Server-Side GTM intends you to do is basically collect that data and use it in real time in the most customized manner possible. So it's giving you all that power, giving you the power to transform, the power to clean up, the power to enrich, the power to essentially do whatever you really want with your data in real time. It does have its limitations, of course, but again, open door to the cloud. In the cloud, you can do whatever you want. And finally, we mentioned before that this is now set up, or the intention that Google has is to give you a first-party data collection endpoint to help you build that relationship of trust with your users, that replacement for third-party cookie, that meaningful interaction with your customers, guaranteeing that the data you do have is as good quality and as trustworthy as possible. Users are sending that data, or the browser sending that data to your own domain, which they trust because they have a relationship with you, and you are then guaranteeing that that data continues to have the purpose and the intent that you had when you collected it. And that said, I mean, if you have any further questions on how this works or on ways to approach this, because I've kind of just gone over a little, please add them to the Q&A and we'll address them in the questions. Oh, and I forgot one slide. Fantastic. Again, we did mention this earlier, the performance, because we're only sending one stream of data. It will make it can make the site feel that little bit lighter, because again, there's not 1,000 different tags trying to do all the different things at the same time that the user's trying to consume the content and trying to do whatever it is they're trying to do on your website. So being able to just send one stream of data makes everything very fast, very light, and feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more pleasant to the customer, with the advantages that this has, not only just in terms of user experience, but also in terms of how your site is qualified in search results, etc., because simply it's offering a better user experience. And now I will pass it over to Adam.
All right, thanks, Shorty. So hopefully that helped you understand what server-side GTM is capable of and the problems it solves. I already see some questions coming through in the Q&A, which is great. We'll hit on those. But before we get there, talk through how to get started. Okay, so there are a couple helpful prerequisites for server-side GTM. We've talked a lot about how it lives in the cloud. That most often is GCP, but it doesn't have to be Google Cloud. It can be AWS, it can be Azure. We have customers who host it on their own infrastructure. Anything that supports Docker is able to host server-side GTM. But it's important that you at least have some sort of environment where you think you could host this, whether it's GCP or otherwise. Skipping to the last part, server-side GTM itself is free to use, but because it's running on your own servers, there's a cost associated with running those servers. If it's on Google Cloud, it's a Google Cloud cost, not a server-side GTM cost. But it is something that will come with using server-side GTM. We recently launched a cloud cost calculator on our developer site, which I can link in the chat after this. But often these costs are in the range of a couple $100s a month. So just something to keep in mind. And finally, it does take some technical resources to implement this, especially in a way that gets you all the benefits that Jordi talked about. We are trying to make it easier over time, but for the foreseeable future, we definitely recommend working with someone like an InfoTrust that has a lot of experience in this space, because you really need to understand tagging and ad tech as well as the cloud. And there's just not a lot of folks out there in the world that live across those spaces like an InfoTrust and other service partners. So those are some things to keep in mind when you're getting started with server-side GTM. We have a lot on our developer site if you want to read more about what it takes to actually implement. But for now, we'll wrap on the content, and that leaves us with plenty of time for questions. So feel free to add either to the chat or the Q&A. Okay, so I'll just go by an order of questions asked. So Derek asks, isn't GTM still just the sender for other platforms like Facebook, Google Ads, etc.? So what is the benefit of server-side GTM in that respect, knowing that GTM doesn't store the info, at least for non-server side? So I have some thoughts. Jordi, do you want to take a stab though?
Okay, I can start. I mean, server-side GTM for me means more. So I will say here that I have a personal issue with calling it GTM because although it has a bit of overlap with the functionality, it really is a different thing. And essentially what it is a data streaming platform. So really what server-side GTM means for your business, it means first-party data. It means real-time data streaming. It means ownership and control of that data. It means custom data sets. It means, so it's basically giving you the ability to work with that data before it is used by others. You can do this in GTM, of course, but then it's available for everybody to basically take, use, and it's publicly available. Whereas doing it in server-side GTM, it's within your own gated community. It's safe. It's secure. You have full control. You have all the ownership. So that would, and then so really that's where I think this fits in. It's really you being able to build that relationship of trust with your users by saying, hey, I'm taking your data. I'm going to use it for the purposes that I've stated in my privacy agreement, which you accepted by visiting my site and clicking on the window. And then you are relaying it to others. That's where the similarity with GTM is. It is really giving you the ability to send that data to third parties, but it's giving you that extra safety, and it's allowing you to build that extra level of trust because you are guaranteeing to your customers that you are the gatekeeper. That data is not going anywhere that they have not approved.
Yes, perfect. And I would maybe just to give an example of something that we're seeing customers do. So in the retail space, it's very common to pass the revenue from a given transaction to the data layer, make that available to tags, and route that data to Google and other destinations. But if you wanted to send profit margin instead, you theoretically could calculate that in the browser, but one, you're making it available for anyone to see, including your competitors. And two, it can be very cumbersome to run that calculation in the browser. It's effectively slowing down your site. And so with server-side GTM, and in this case, the Firestore lookup, you can calculate that profit margin directly and then send that to all your various destinations in a more secure way. So everything Jordy said holds true, and there's just a lot of benefits that sort of depend on the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah. And if I can add to that example, if you're interfacing with an API that requires credentials, if you're using it on the web, those credentials are going to be publicly available on the web, even though they're your credentials. On server-side GTM, you are still doing that communication, but you're doing it behind the scenes. Those credentials are safe and they cannot be taken or reused by anybody else. Without even discussing the fact that you're setting cookies as HTTP only secure cookies, which are respected by browsers and have a longer lifetime, therefore being able to create more meaningful and more accurate audiences.
All right, the questions are really starting to flow in. And I will just I'll mark these as done. Okay, DTS. How is server-side GTM different from Adobe Tag Manager and Telium? So I'll go, and then Jordy, if you want to add in. So both Adobe and Telium have a similar setup in that they've had tag management systems, client-side tag management systems for a long time. They also have their version of server-side tagging that often comes at an additional cost, but they have those offerings. And in principle, they're trying to do something very similar. Where server-side GTM is a bit unique is our focus on maintaining that two-way communication between browser and server. So often what you see is that data gets routed from the browser to the server, and then the server fans it out, which is definitely helpful. But there are plenty of instances where you want the server to communicate back to the browser, maybe send data, send additional sort of configurations and so on. And with server-side GTM, we have that connection well facilitated. And so it opens up a lot more possibilities and also makes it a bit more durable when it comes to leveraging the privacy sandbox APIs in the future and things like that. I don't have hands-on experience with Adobe and Telium, as you can imagine, in my role, but Jordy, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add there.
I mean, what I'd add, I think you've already mentioned it, but really the fact, so one of the main points that I would say in favor of server-side GTM to differentiate them from the others is that you're not locked in, right? If you're using Telium, you're locked into that platform, where a server-side GTM, as you mentioned earlier, you can run it in AWS, you can run it on Azure, you can run it on Hetzner, you can run it, you can use the default implementation of an App Engine, you can run it on Kubernetes and Google Cloud. So really, and yes, it's simple. It has its own limitations, but basically you have this free little package that you can run anywhere, do anything with it. You're not locked in, so to speak. Yeah, that would be my main take on it.
Yeah, great point. Okay, Kanishka asks, you mentioned that we can use server-side setup also as a feedback mechanism in real time. Can you elaborate a bit on that, please? So, Jordy, do you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean,
the
first time I got my hands on server-side GTM, the very first thing I tried to do was create a very basic identity service, right? Make a request to my domain, take that request, see if there is a cookie with an ID in it. If there is, validate that ID. If it doesn't validate or it doesn't have one, create a new one, send them back, send a cookie. That's something I was able to do. I was able to create, and it took me very little time. Again, very basic service. Being able to generate a custom content and set it in the browser just opens up so many doors. So in this case, it's just creating a little ID, which I'm going to call my Geordie ID, and is going to live in the browser as long as that cookie survives. And but when I say ID, this could be reaching into a personalization service and returning segments, or being able to send back a signal when a user has moved from one user segment to another. Have they become a power user? Have they moved into the likely to churn segment, and therefore we should maybe use that signal to raise a feedback form to find out why they're not happy, what we can do to improve. So being able to foster that kind of communication in a safe environment like that is server side, that really just gives you a lot more power than you would have on without this.
Yeah, that's a fun experiment that you ran, and exactly the kind of thing that server side supports. Okay. So Brian asked a very good question. If server-side GTM is not a replacement for client-side GTM, what are the scenarios where you'd want to use both? So I definitely have thoughts here, and can offer the Google perspective, but Geordie, as always, feel free to jump in. So our goal with server-side GTM is to not entirely replace client-side tagging. We very intentionally built it so that it still uses a client-side Google tag to run in the browser, because you need something to collect that data and route it to a server. And theoretically, if you had a ton of Eng resources, you could build that yourself. You could write your own custom JavaScript, set up your own server, facilitate that communication. But what we're trying to do with the Google tag and its integration with server-side GTM is make that very easy to do. And as we update it over time, you're getting those updates automatically. So if that tag behavior needs to change, it can. So in that sense, client-side GTM and server-side GTM are partners in this setup. It's not one replacing the other. I think in practice, what you'll see is not all partners are able to move their tags fully server-side yet. So I'm going to share a link to the community tag gallery shortly, but you'll see which partners have and others haven't. And so a lot of advertisers right now have sort of truly hybrid setups where some tags are still running client-side as usual, but they're slowly trying to move more and more server-side. So there's sort of the two reasons that you'll continue to use client-side GTM. It's meant to be that way, and then in practice, everything can't even be moved to server-side, even if you wanted to.
I'd only add that there's things that just make sense and need to run in the browser. There's A/B testing, there's personalization. Once the content is loaded on the page, users can interact with it without necessarily generating more network requests and potentially, yeah. So there's things that just make sense to run in the browser, and also it gives you a very convenient place where the whole organization can deal with configuring that data that is more practical than maybe server-side, where things need to be a bit leaner because we're trying to keep that thing in real time. So the heavy lifting makes sense for an dedicated application like the browser to handle more of the heavy lifting, whereas the streaming part can be lighter and just stream things a lot more quickly and handle that. And that doesn't mean you can't go full server-side. Of course you can. You're just going to miss out on the practical part of the client side.
Exactly. Okay, I see a couple questions on site speed. So Conrad asked, do you have any statistic related to page performance improvements after switching fully to server-side tagging? And Michael had asked a similar question. So from the Google side, we don't have any sort of standard benchmarks, in part because it's so dependent on how you run your website, how many client-side tags you've had, how many you've moved to server-side. But we do have a couple of case studies where advertisers have seen improvements in the 7 to 10% range, which in the world of site speed is pretty good. But Jordy, I don't know if you have any InfoTrust specific examples that you've seen.
Unfortunately, the majority of the implementations we've done to date are basically the very basic GA4 Facebook GAPI implementations, which doesn't really give much space for optimizing site performance because there's lots of other parties involved, and you're barely making a dent in what's happening on a typical website, which can have up to 30, 40 different tags running at the same time. So I wouldn't say that site speed is the reason you should go for server-side. It's a perk of going towards server-side, but there are so many other significant advantages: bespoke data sets, being governance, security, first party. There's so many other good things that site performance is really more a perk than a feature.
Yeah, agreed. Which segues well into Conrad's next question, which is, should we consider server-side tagging as a data quality improvement?
Yes and no. So tag managers were a data quality improvement on their own because they brought us the data layer, and that meant we had control over data, and we specified tagging plans, and it was easier to control and clean up. But still, data continued to be a mess. So now moving to the server side, unless you stick to very good best practices in the whole pipeline, it won't magically solve your data quality. That said, you can use server side to implement real-time data quality alerting by building a little service that inspects the data going through, and can potentially throw alerts if the data is not correct. And we have a couple of and this is something that's linked to my past and that I'm very excited about. So it really gives you the fact that you now have full control over how that data is happening and can build these systems that can alert you in real time if something is wrong. Means you can prevent data quality issues before they become a large problem.
Nothing to add from my side. I think that summarizes it really well. Okay. Hunter asks, does a CDP type of software like Segment replace server-side GTM? So I'll give my thoughts on this. I don't think it does. I think it can be a complement if you want to use Segment. But server-side GTM is really specifically designed for web data, real-time web data collection. And so someone like Segment is capable of doing that, but they also invest in what you could think of as like batch upload services. So I have this list of customers and I want to send that to Google Ads customer match or Facebook, Facebook's equivalent, and so on. And so they're sort of this like centralized data manager, but they don't specialize in that very specific web interaction. So when we talk about that two-way communication and some of the things that Jordy walked through, that's sort of server-side GTM's bread and butter. And it's not that Segment couldn't build that kind of thing, but given the breadth of things they're trying to solve, it makes more sense for it to be a complement versus a replacement. That's just my POV, though. It really depends on your use cases and so on. So, Jordy, I don't know if you have a differing perspective.
Does an SUV replace a pickup truck? Different tools, they have different focuses, they provide different features, they do have a lot of overlap. They both work very, very well. No complaints on either. Yeah.
Great analogy. I'll be stealing that moving forward. Okay. Kanishka asks, does this mean that all tag configuration setup stays as is in GTM UI, still client side, but we get an additional control platform for regulation? So not exactly. The server-side GTM UI looks and feels exactly the same as the client-side GTM UI with a few additional server-side specific features. But you do need to migrate your tags over if you want them to fire server-side. So for example, let's say you have a Google Ads conversion tag on your purchase page. And today, client-side GTM is loading that in the browser. The way you would migrate that to server-side GTM is you would have the server-side GTM sort of configuration tag, that single Google tag, collect that purchase data generically, send that to server-side GTM, and then you'll have a server-side Google Ads conversion tag that fires on that purchase event. So the client-side tag gets shut down, the server-side tag gets spun up, and over time you'll migrate at least some of those tags in that fashion. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, in a similar realm, Kyle asks, so server-side is sending events directly, not using a data layer. It would require a separate dev setup instead of using the current data layer. So this is a good question. Jordy, do you want to take a stab?
Sure. I mean, server-side GTM really is a first-party data collection endpoint. You can take any data that you want, send it there. GTM simply offers you the very convenient way of configuring a GA, a GA4 tag, changing the transport URL. That data is now shipped to your domain instead of googleanalytics.com. But essentially, it's a wheelbarrow. You put data in, you take another place, you dump it out. You're just changing where that data goes, and you decide how that data gets there. You can do it server-side from your own application and have a direct communication entirely server to server without going through the browser at all, if you so wish. GTM is simply a convenient way to manage it. Nothing stopping you from creating your own data payload, sending it in whatever manner you wish to your data, to your endpoint, and then streaming it from there. That ties in very well with wearables, mobile apps, toasters, Internet of Things, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Conrad asks, could you say how server-side tagging can help with Safari ITP and Firefox BTP? This recently changed a bit, so I can give the latest. In general, server-side GTM allows you to use HTTP set cookies instead of JavaScript set cookies. And historically, ITP has treated JavaScript set cookies differently, shortens a 7-day lifespan and 1-day lifespan if there's link decoration present, things like that. So server-side GTM offered this much longer cookie durability relative to client-side tagging. They recently had a blog post about a feature in preview mode that changes how they handle those server set HTTP managed cookies. And it gets fairly complicated, but essentially they're trying to prevent certain companies that were using this functionality to continue to track users across the web. And so it wasn't designed to stop what server-side GTM is doing and how it works, but in practice, it does mean that depending on how you set up server-side GTM, it could enforce a 7-day cookie lifetime in Safari versus what used to be, up to 2 years. So we're still sort of processing and testing this update. It's not sort of fully live yet, but it's an important one to keep in mind, as it might have some impact on how you would want to deploy server-side GTM.
Now, I'd only add that basically by using HTTP cookies over JavaScript, you're basically telling Safari, Firefox, etc., that you're making an effort to be a good citizen. You're protecting that data. That data is not readable by JavaScript. Nobody can inject JavaScript to read or intercept that data. It's going to be data that's only going to be available between the browser and you. So you're building that relationship of trust, and you're basically saying to Safari, hey, I'm doing everything I can to be a good citizen, to respect the user's privacy, to respect their information, which helps.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I'm glad you added that. Okay, Preston asks, can the server-side GTM supported integrations be used without PII? Quick answer is yes. You don't need to share PII for a lot of these integrations. They're still HTTP requests. We're able to use cookies, first-party cookies and third-party cookies. The lights just turned off for some reason. But looking forward, a lot of partners, including Google, are becoming more reliant on your ability to pass hashed PII as a supplementary data source. So it's something to keep in mind, but it's definitely not a mandatory aspect of using these integrations.
Yeah, you can use it without PII, but they will complain. Oh God, they will complain because but then we go back to this relationship of trust, right? If the user trusts you to use the data safely, the user will be okay with you having that phone number because or email or PII because they know you will not abuse it. It goes back to the relationship of trust.
Yes. Okay, we have 5 minutes. I'm going to try and weave Kala's question and Robin's question. So Kala asks, can you explain again where the data is stored before landing in BigQuery, or show that diagram again? So if you want to go back to that BigQuery diagram. And then Robin asks, where does Google Ads Data Hub fit into the scenario of server-side tagging in terms of data flow? Okay, so most important thing is to think of server-side GTM as a real-time data transfer service. So data already has to be sort of in transit, and server-side GTM isn't stopping or collecting that data. It's taking that data and routing it somewhere else. So think of it as data already in movement, and it's just being forked and shaped in different ways. So when it comes to data landing in BigQuery, essentially it's in movement through server-side GTM, and then server-side GTM can point it down to BigQuery, and that's where it can actually be collected permanently. And so you're not storing any data in server-side GTM. You're only storing data in BigQuery if you choose to do so. Relating that to Ads Data Hub is very much separate from all of this in the sense that it is data that has already sort of passed through that whole flow of collecting data from your website, routing it to Google processing it, doing all the attribution, the modeling, and so on. And then we push that to your Ads Data Hub account. And so that data is sort of at rest in that environment, and you're able to query it directly via the Ads Data Hub sort of framework. So it's similar in the sense that they're both tools that live on the cloud, but they're solving very different problems. So hopefully that helps answer. Jordy, anything to add on that one?
No, I mean, server-side GTM is entirely stateless. It only works with the data that you send it on each single request. And once that data has been processed, it's gone. It's not retrievable. It's not stored on session storage. It's not stored in cookies. It simply receives and sends back data. It does not keep anything.
Perfect. Okay. Hunter asks, can we stand up our own server and manually code each server-side connection without GTM? The answer is theoretically yes, but my response would be, why would you want to do that? There are obviously reasons why you might want to, but it's a lot of work. And what we're trying to do with server-side GTM is not say, this is the only way to do this, but we've made this we've made this much easier than if you were to try to do this yourself. But Jordy, maybe you've tried to do this yourself in the past, so pass it to you if you have any perspective.
Yes, I mean, if you look at LinkedIn, literally my previous job before joining InfoTrust was building a data collection and data streaming service. So I appreciate basically what Google is giving you this first-party data collection endpoint at barely no effort at all. You can run it wherever you want. You can even with App Engine, it's just 3 clicks away. You've got it running. All you need to do is map your domain, and you've got your own first-party data collection endpoint capable of filtering, transforming, and streaming data in real time to anything with an HTTP API. I don't know what else to add to that.
Yeah, no, that a much better answer than mine. So I'm glad you weighed in. Okay.
Could you? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And it will give you the ability to create your bespoke behavior and add and extend it with rules. Whereas server-side GTM, you need to rely heavily on the cloud for extending functionality. But you know that in the end is it's a choice. Same choice as you would use. Can you build your own tag manager? Of course. Yes. It's not magic.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, we are at time. Thanks everyone for joining. This was hopefully helpful introduction to server-side GTM. I'm glad we had so much time for Q&A. I think it's helpful to really dive in on that front to help people understand. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.